All right, hello everyone. Happy Monday. I'm excited to get started on our new unit. One of my favorites. It's Ancient Greece. It's a lot different than our last two units from Mesopotamia and Ancient Egypt. So let's get to it. Today we will examine the physical map of Greece and identify defining features of the Greek environment. First and most importantly is that it is not a river valley civilization as the last two units were. You'll see what I mean. So here's our starting map, the physical map of Greece. You'll see that it sort of looks like a hand that's sticking out with its fingers that are poking down like this. It also includes lots and lots and lots of islands in this body of water. The Aegean Sea. On the western side of the country is the Ionian Islands and the Ionian Sea. You have the small Sea of Crete, but this large body of water is all the Mediterranean Sea, and that will be our topic and our activity for tomorrow. So Greece is, as you're going to see, the shading here, this green does not represent grass, it represents elevation. So the green areas are more flat areas where farming might have been possible, even though it's a rocky soil, and it's still difficult in Greece. Not so easy as in ancient Egypt along the Nile or Mesopotamia along the Tigris and Euphrates from our previous unit. So this right here, this represents mountains. It's elevation. We don't have a lot of mountains around here in Massachusetts and in New Bedford, but the flat lands where they would settle, the mountains provided difficulty, essentially, for these Greeks to travel and to communicate with each other's settlements, as you'll see in a few minutes. And right here, in this area called the Peloponnesus, also mountainous, and then Crete, the largest of the Greek islands, you can see the peaks of the mountains there. So let's get into it. You'll see some vocabulary along the way here. So the Greeks lived on a rocky, mountainous peninsula that was surrounded by water. If a body of land is surrounded by water on four sides, such as Crete, 1, 2, 3, 4, then it's an island. Greece is a peninsula, though, because there's water on 1, 2, 3 sides, and the fourth side here is more land, more of Europe and the Balkans and the neighboring countries. So again, a peninsula is land surrounded by water on 3 sides. Vocabulary word, it's a peninsula. And the interesting thing about Greece is that it's a large peninsula made up of many smaller peninsulas. And so if you look, you see that this is one large peninsula. I just counted the sides for you, but then you have a peninsula sticking out right here. This little piece of land connected to it makes this water, water, water. This land right here is not an island because it's connected by land right there. It's a peninsula. This is a peninsula. This peninsula has peninsulas on it. It's peninsula mania, guys. And right here is more peninsulas, more peninsulas, more peninsulas. They're all over the place. And this is the defining geographic feature of the country of Greece. And so we call it a rugged coastline. It's rough. It's jagged. The coast has cliffs and inlets and all of this jagged area. These are all, this is all jagged area. All these little inlets of the water that comes in. So as we examine this rugged coastline and these inlets of these water, this is where their harbors would be, where their boats would go. But remember, it's rugged because of the way it's shaped, like this, like pretty jagged looking, and rugged because it was high cliffs, which we'll be examining too. So the mountains are a defining feature of Greece as well as that, as it being a peninsula with many other peninsulas. Greece has very few flat areas for settlement, and that means areas for farming. You can't really farm on the side of a mountain. So the land, the soil is already rocky and difficult to farm on. There's no natural rivers that give you silt and floods like we have from like in our last unit with ancient Egypt and the Nile. That doesn't really happen for the Greeks. Their water comes from springs, underground springs in the mountains. So the ancient Greeks, this is important, this is vital, they lived in communities in the flat areas between the mountains, which is, if we go back to our map, like right over here. Now, yes, there's some water over here coming down from the mountains, but these aren't rivers like the Tigris, Euphrates, or the Nile. So when they're living in these flat areas, that's where they're developing. And so Let's go to the next slide here. So the ancient Greeks are living in communities in these flat areas between the mountains. But this is a cause and effect. Because of this, the effect on them is that the Greek villages were separated by these mountains, and they're not easy to travel. So, if you're an ancient Greek that's living in an area, in a flat area like this, in a village like right here, you're not necessarily going to even know that people exist over here because these mountains, up in Thessaly, as it's labeled, are separating you. It's like a whole different world. It's like being on two sides of the United States of America as far as they were concerned in the ancient world. Travel over these mountains was almost non-existent. Therefore, the Greeks lived in isolated communities. Isolation means to develop separate from one another. Think of like isolation in basketball, isolation defense. It's one-on-one. These people in Greece, if you lived over here on the Peloponnesus, you had water separating you, and you had mountains separating you from anyone else. So really, you were your own little community. You developed your own way. This had an enormously important effect on the ancient Greeks. Because the Greek communities were separated by mountains, water, rugged coastlines, travel was very difficult, not impossible, but took a very long time. It was not ideal. And to be quite honest, if you examine the map, if you were a Greek living here in a village or a city, and you wanted to travel over to here, it was easier and faster, more efficient for you to travel the coastline in a boat this way to get to your destination for trade or whatever it might be, politics, than for you to travel the straightest distance across these mountains here. Imagine that. It's easier for you to travel on the water, on these rugged coastlines, to access this location than it would be for you to travel on land this way, which is more natural to humans. And this is our big idea for the day. Each Greek village developed like a separate country. What this means is the Greeks didn't share a national identity like we do in the United States. We say that we're all Americans. But the Greeks didn't say, yeah, we're the ancient Greeks. We're the Greeks. No, very much the opposite. They did not see themselves as Greeks, rather as people from their own city or village or town. This was not a unified Greece for a very, very, very long time. Okay? If you lived here, and then you lived right up over here, you lived on the Greek today, the country of Greece, which is all this outline here. These are the modern countries around it: Albania, Macedonia, Bulgaria, Turkey. What you see here is Greece. These people lived in the land of ancient Greece, but they were not considering themselves as Greeks. They would consider themselves like, if we lived in this country, and we're from the state of Massachusetts, and people are from the state of New Hampshire, they would say, well, I'm from New Hampshire. I'm not an American. Well, I'm from Massachusetts. I'm not an American. The ancient Greeks, if they lived in different areas, then it would be more like they said, like if you lived in the ancient city-state of Athens, then you were an Athenian. You weren't a Greek. They didn't identify as having a national identity. I'm a Spartan from Sparta. I'm not a Greek. That's a really important mindset to understand about these ancient people. That's why war is such a prevalent piece, or such an important overarching idea and piece of how they developed. And so as we wrap this up here, this is a really cool map because it shows really all of these mountainous areas. Even the islands are mountains that come out of the water, and that means there are very few places where farmland can be utilized. Flat areas here, flat areas here, flat areas here. Mountains, even taller mountains, separate them. You can see based on the physical map of elevation how these mountains separate, but this gives you a really cool idea, a really clear idea of how vast and tall these mountains really were, and what a small amount of farmland and flat areas where these settlements could have occurred, where they would have been. Okay, so to wrap it up, Greece is a large peninsula made up of other smaller peninsulas. A peninsula is land that has water on 3 sides. If it was 4 sides like the island of Crete, it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, and we don't have that. The rugged coastline with jagged areas like this and cliffs made it very difficult for any travel at all. And because of this land being set up this way, the ancient Greeks developed isolated from one another. That means separated from one another. This means that they generally shared the language of what the ancient Greeks spoke, but their religion might have been slightly different. Their governments were very different from each other. If they weren't very far apart, these villages or city-states weren't very far apart, they would still have developed different ways to rule. You might have democracy in one place. You might have a king ruling in another place, and they might not be all that far apart. This meant that their education was different in what they valued. The gods or goddesses that were more important or prevalent to them as well. Okay, so now you're going to go back into Google Classroom, and there's going to be an IXL activity to begin working on ancient Greek geography.